Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're glad you could join us. This Deep Dive is brought to you by AI-deas. That's our channel under the Good Business Podcast, which is hosted by the PHINMA-DLSU Center for Business and Society. Their mission, which we really believe in, is business as a force for good. And just a little behind-the-scenes info, this is actually an AI-generated Deep Dive. We put it together using Notebook LM. Pretty neat, huh? Okay, so today's mission, we're going to dig into a really thought-provoking article. It's from the Managing for Society column in the Manila Times. The title is The Flaws of Legislated Wages, A Case for Alternatives. And look, this isn't some, abstract economic debate. This is something that really, truly touches everyone. Affects you if you're an employee, an employer, or even just, buying your weekly groceries. It has real impact.
Oh, absolutely. It really does. And the article, it zeroes in on the core debate around wage policy, specifically the, let's say, contentious nature of legislated wage increases. This whole discussion is very relevant right now, isn't it? Especially with the recent news about the Senate and the House not reaching an agreement on that proposed legislated wage hike. Yeah, it really brings the whole thing to the forefront. And, while lots of people instinctively support legislated wages, it seems like a simple way to get fair pay, protect workers. Critics, like this article points out, argue the whole framework. Well, it's flawed. It can lead to some unintended consequences, things that might actually end up hurting the very workers it's supposed to help. So basically, what we'll explore today are those two sides. What the article identifies as the key problems with legislated wages, and then this quite interesting alternative it proposes.
Okay, that sounds like a great plan. Yeah, because I think initially you hear legislated wages, and it just sounds good, right? There's this immediate appeal. The idea is set a baseline income, protect people from being exploited, make sure they can cover basic costs, a safety net. Makes sense. But like you said, the article argues there are some pretty serious cracks there. So what are the big flaws it highlights? Where does it start to break down?
Well, the first and maybe the biggest flaw the article really hammers home is what it calls the blanket nature of these policies. They often completely overlook how diverse economic realities are across different regions. Just think about it. The cost of living in a big city compared to a small rural town, vastly different.
Yeah.
But a nationwide legislated wage tries to apply one single standard everywhere. And that can really hit businesses in less wealthy regions much, much harder.
Right. It's not a level playing field to begin with.
Exactly. And this burden, it's especially tough for small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. They're the backbone of most economies. They often operate on much tighter margins. The article really stresses how vulnerable they are to what are essentially artificially inflated wage standards. For an SME, this isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It can mean really tough choices. Things like having to lay people off, freezing hiring, or, in the worst case, even closing down completely. And the irony is those outcomes hurt the very workers the policy was designed to protect in the first place. It's a kind of complex, unfortunate chain reaction.
So a policy designed with good intentions can kind of backfire because it doesn't account for those local differences or the reality for smaller businesses. And it's not just about the pure economics either, is it? The article also gets into the political side of things. How does politics, get tangled up in wage policy, according to the article?
That's a really critical point the article makes. It argues that these legislated wages are, and I'm quoting loosely here, frequently shaped by political agendas rather than economic realities. Politicians, quite understandably, want public approval. So they might push for wage increases that sound great, play well with voters.
Yeah, easy win.
Right, but maybe aren't actually sustainable for the economy in the long run. The piece sort of characterizes this as a populist approach where getting those short-term political gains can overshadow the economy's actual long-term health.
So political appeal over economic substance sometimes?
That's the argument. And when wage hikes are driven more by that kind of political motivation, they often fail to consider really critical factors, things like, actual worker productivity, or the competitiveness of certain industries, or just the basic ability of businesses, especially SMEs, to actually absorb those higher labor costs without something breaking. The article warns that policies like that risk creating some serious economic distortions. This could mean increased inflation, which hits everyone's wallet, or maybe reduced investment because businesses get hesitant, or just a general decline in overall economic efficiency. It's got wider ripples than you might think.
That really paints a picture of why just mandating a wage increase might be problematic. It's a tricky balance. But okay, the article doesn't just criticize, it does offer an alternative, right? So given these potential downsides we've talked about with legislated wages, what solution does the article put forward, and where has it actually worked?
Right. It doesn't just leave us hanging. It strongly advocates for something called the progressive wage model, or PWM. It presents this as a more, let's say, targeted and adaptable solution for wage issues. And yes, it explicitly points to Singapore as a place where this model has been implemented quite successfully in several key sectors.
Progressive wage model.
Right.
Okay, how does that actually work? What's the core idea?
Well, the core mechanism, which is quite fascinating, is that it directly ties wage increases to specific factors, things like skill development, improvements in productivity, and established industry standards. So unlike that one-size-fits-all approach of legislated wages, this PWM model is actually designed to recognize and adapt to the different economic conditions you find across various sectors and regions.
So it's more tailored.
Exactly. So for workers, it creates a really clear incentive structure. If you learn new skills, if you become more productive, your pay goes up. It's linked. And for employers, well, they benefit from having a more capable, more efficient workforce. The article describes this as creating a sort of positive feedback loop, a cycle of growth and shared prosperity. It's not just about paying more money, it's about paying more for getting more value, essentially.
That sounds like it tries to align incentives better.
Yeah.
You mentioned Singapore having success with this. Can you elaborate a bit on how it works there based on the article?
Yeah, absolutely. The article highlights Singapore's use of the PWM in sectors like cleaning, security, and landscaping, often lower wage sectors traditionally. And in these industries, workers don't just get raises based on the calendar, they get incremental wage increases that are directly linked to acquiring new skills or getting certifications.
Okay, so there's a clear path.
A very clear path. Their improved skills directly translate into higher earnings. And for the businesses involved, they actually see enhanced competitiveness because their workforce is more skilled and productive. It's a really clever way to try and balance the interests of both sides. Because when wages are tied to productivity and improving skills, employers are more likely to see those increases as justified investments rather than burdens. That's a phrase from the piece. And at the same time, workers feel more empowered. They see a way to advance their careers, earn more based on their own efforts. It really aims to build this collaborative framework built on shared responsibility, mutual benefit, and long-term economic stability.
That does sound very well structured, aiming for that win-win. But, no system's ever perfect. Does the article mention any potential challenges or criticisms of this progressive wage model? Any downsides?
It does touch upon that. The main criticism raised is that, well, implementing a PWM system does require a pretty significant upfront investment, particularly in things like training programs and building the infrastructure needed to support all that skill development.
All right, this sounds costly.
It can be. And some might argue that initial cost just isn't feasible for every economy or every industry, especially if resources are tight.
So how does the article respond to that potential barrier?
It addresses it directly. The argument made is quite strong that this initial investment is a small price for the long-term benefits of a skilled and productive workforce. It frames it as an investment, not just a cost. And then it outlines how governments can play a really crucial role in making it happen. This could involve things like providing subsidies for training, actively helping to build partnerships between industries and, say, technical colleges, and setting up really clear, transparent guidelines for how wages progress with skills. Basically, the argument is, if policymakers prioritize developing the workforce, they can create an environment where, genuinely, both workers and businesses can thrive together. It's strategic thinking about human capital.
Okay, so let's sort of wrap this up. We started by talking about that recent disagreement, the failure to pass a legislated wage hike. And that might seem like a setback on the surface. But what we've dug into here, based on the article, suggests it could actually be a really important moment, an opportunity maybe to pause and rethink our whole approach to wages. We've definitely contrasted the potential pitfalls of that populist-driven, one-size-fits-all legislated wage against what sounds like the more sustainable, maybe more equitable benefits of this progressive wage model.
Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the core message from the article seems pretty clear. We really need to move beyond maybe overly simplistic solutions and try to embrace policies that genuinely aim for long-term prosperity for everyone, especially in today's complex, interconnected world. And this really raises an interesting question for you, the listener, to think about. How might different industries, maybe in your own region, adapt to a skills-based wage model like the PWM? And what could be some practical first steps to actually make that transition happen successfully? Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought.
And that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us here on AI-deas. Remember, we're part of the Good Business Podcast, hosted by the PHINMA-DLSU Center for Business and Society, always pushing that mission of business as a force for good. We really hope this discussion gave you plenty to think about, and we'll leave you with this final thought from the article. By prioritizing workforce development, policymakers can create an environment where workers and businesses thrive.